Hey, everybody, and
Hello.
welcome to Breaking Story with Young Screenwriters. We are a resource and community for up and coming screenwriters, and today we're talking about a classic challenge in screenwriting, which is plotting. And specifically, we're looking at two techniques and sort of how they fit into the structure of story that can help you take an idea or a fragment of an idea and build out the rest of your story. So maybe you're at the very beginning of your script, you're at the very beginning of your development process, you have a really interesting, inciting incident, and you're kind of looking at it like, now what? Or maybe you're a little bit further along, you know your beginning, you know your end, but there's some stuff in the middle that you know needs to happen, and you're wondering, how do I order these things? How do I connect these different events? And we have two really awesome techniques for that we are going to talk about today, which
Yes,
are, yeah,
and I would
go
say,
ahead.
like, when we're talking about, okay, let's just say you have a fragment of something. I think most
Mhm.
beginning writers, when they first like sort of get the spark of, oh my God, I'm having characters talk to each other. I have an idea. I have an images. I have sort of even just a feeling of an end of how something comes together, a tone, a vibe, whatever you want to call it.
A
A lot
vibe.
oftentimes beginning writers think in terms of sequences, right? They think in terms of like events, like, oh my God, this ending with this character, but they don't necessarily know how to get from here to there in a way that still feels like the thing that excited them. And right there, I just outlined like one of the biggest challenges of storytelling and writing great scripts is, oh my God, I had this kernel that excited me, and I maybe wrote the beginning of it. Like I got to the inciting incident, and I kind of know where I want to go, and I know how I want this story to feel. But um, I there's disconnection, like there's incongruities. Like for example, let's just say you wrote that feature, but like there are parts of it that feel like the movie you wanted it to be, and parts of it that feel kind of disconnected or don't have. It's about creating internal consistency and that sense of this feels of a piece. This feels like a singular experience. Hard to do. Right? The seed, or you started with. Yeah, sorry, I'm cutting out. Yeah, I'm back.
Here
When you
you
start with
are.
a sequence that excites you, it can be very intimidating to sort of connect things, to bring that internal consistency, to have internal internal consistency in your story. It's really, I think, something that comes later in deep edits. It's something that takes a lot of work and effort. But we're going to talk today about some tools for developing that sense of connectivity and making things gel and making things feel like a story that, like at the end of the story, you want the ending to feel inevitable but surprising.
Right.
That's the magic trick. That's so hard. And it's rarely achieved, honestly, when you watch television or movies. It's sort of like, oh, yep, I know that's where it was going. Or where did that come from? That was unsatisfying, right? You want to surprise audiences, you want to delight them with the hook of, or so you want to delight them with surprise and inevitability. But how do you get something inevitable that's surprising? It feels interconnected. It almost feels like a paradox. I'm rambling a little bit, but I think the tool we want to talk about two tools. The first is sort of creating connectivity, creating a clear line of causality in your plot, and the second is about what the first is obviously the story circle, Dan Harmon. The second is the story clock that Alexie is going to talk about, which is kind of like bringing connections, making sure
Yep.
that it feels of a piece. It's an interesting exercise, but Alexie, what do you how long when was the story circle first introduced to you?
The story circle or the story clock?
Story circle and story clock. I'm curious.
Okay. So I can't, honestly, I think I saw the story clock first. And I don't even it was like there's a notebook that was kickstarted that was sort of based on this idea. And I think it's just called the Story Clock Notebook. And I was like, what is this? And I looked into it, and that's kind of how I discovered this. And then I just read a little bit more about the idea behind it on my own and was like, this is really neat. And honestly, I think that some people take it really far. I think that there's like different ways of connecting all the events on the clock and making like a big web. But to me, the thing that always stood out and was particularly useful is the symmetry aspect of the story clock. I think for the story circle, which is, Dan Harmon's thing, or it's attributed to him. I don't know that it's actually his
Well, no,
thing. I think,
what
yeah,
it is. It's his articulation of Joseph Campbell's monomyth, right?
right.
Like it's his version, his simplification, his language to simplify the hero's journey, which we all know. It's the tried and true storytelling method of Hollywood, right? But he found a way to really simplify it out, get rid of some of the Jungian language, and make it a little more flexible and accessible to people. But it's a hero's
Yeah.
journey.
And I think might actually be worth taking a quick step back and explaining how both of these things work. And basically, both of them look at the timeline of your movie as circular, as a
Yes.
circle. And so in Dan Harmon's story circle, it's basically that you have the story mapped on a circle and you're moving from different slices of the pie in which different things happen. So kind of going around the perimeter of the circle, and each slice of the pie section has a different thing that's happening narratively. A story clock is similar. It's again, you take the timeline of the movie, you wrap it around in a circle, around the perimeter of the circle, and you're mapping out your movie as if it were on the face of the clock with the timeline going around. And in that one, it's really about what is across the circle, what like the opposite side of the circle. So 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock are opposites on the circle. There's 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Those are opposites. And that's really what
So
matters.
if you have an event at 3 o'clock on
Yeah.
your circle, let's just say that's the inciting incident. How does that parallel the beat directly across from it in the circle? And you could also, if you're really getting down to it, you could even put page count in there.
I do.
Right. Well, there you
Yeah.
go. But you can. That exercise is all about creating interconnectivity, and thinking in terms of association. So you're not just thinking in terms of like the linear, progression of things that happen in your story, but how events in your story relate to other events in your story. It's clever, and we're going to talk, I think, later about circles and what's kind of interesting about
and
that.
why they all take this shape.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're the baseline explanation I have is that human beings just find that shape comforting. It's just, we've come back to where we were, but we've changed, right? So I'm going to go through the beats of the story circle really quickly. Again, this is a distillation of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. It's the core beats. It's 8 moments. It's you, a character, this character needs something. They go to get the thing they need, and they adapt while pursuing that thing to obstacles usually. And then they find the thing they're looking for, 5. And then 6, they pay a price for the thing that they wanted in the beginning of the story that was unexpected. And 7, they return to where they were before. And 8, change ultimately, right? So what's interesting about this is, for me, not so much how it applies to like macro plot, like in narrative, like, okay, yes, you can take like the large beats of your story and sort of plunk out, okay, this is my character. They need something that's tied to their flaw. Okay. Flawed character needs something. They want something. They go to get it. Maybe that's the inciting incident. Maybe that's the act 1 break. But, so you need go or all act 1, adapt, find, change, pay are all act 2, and return, change or act 3, right? You can do that. But what's interesting for me is to think outside of the constraints of like your act breaks, outside of the constraint, and sort of really just think about like what's happening in the story. Like what's the logical, what's the line of logical progression and like motivation? Like if you can you do a 15-second version of this? And can you do a 30-second version of this? Can you do a minute version of this? Can can you tell a 30-second story with these beats? Like, that's kind of what's interesting to me. And possibly, let's just say, if you're writing an episode of a sitcom, can you have 4 characters all have their own story circles that all interlock, and like, everybody has their pay return change happen like a waterfall, like, or it's not a waterfall, but they all happen in a cascade that washes over the audience. Like, oh my God, I just got 3 catharsis. Like, that's the interesting space of it. Like, to think, like, in terms of the line of action centered around a character, and then contextualizing that in your story. I feel like I'm using too much, I'm being overly verbose, but like, I like the flexibility, right? I like to think like, oh, how can I have a story circle in Act 1? How can I have a story circle, even if it's just for a side character? Like, how can I make a character go after something and pay a price for having gone after the thing and changed, right? It's like a little circle, like miniature line of action. And just for me, it like gets me out of, it's the simplest way I can like force myself to have a structured thought without like getting bogged down in, okay, on page 25, I have this happening and it affects all my overall narrative. Like, I can just think about, okay, what's one character in the story doing? And it could be the protagonist, it could be an antagonist. And it forces you to humanize the character, right? Because the moment you have, the powerful part of this is the paying the price, right? You have a character who goes, it means they're an active character who's pursuing an objective. And then they pay a price for having that objective. I think there's also a weakness to this, possibly. I'd be curious to hear your opinion on, Alexie, but
Yeah.
that's powerful. You have a character, they go after something they want and they pay a price. And let's just say let's have your mentor character has that little character arc play out in the middle of your narrative. That's more interesting than possibly gets you out of your head in just thinking about your character and everybody else being two-dimensional, puppets they interact with. It can help you flesh out the world in a richer way and like connect to the story in a deeper way. I'm not saying that you have to use all those ideas. I'm almost talking about using the story circle as an exercise to think deeper about the story, right?
Right. I think absolutely it is, and that's kind of how we're framing it today. Is using it to plot your own movies and to think more deeply about your own work, and something that I think is really neat and why we thought of using these two together, in addition to the fact that they're both circles that you use to plot stuff, is that to spend a brief second on the story clock, which we basically already explained. Remember that everything that is across the circle from each other, across the face of the clock, is connected. A lot of times it's set up and payoff. So at 3 o'clock, you have an event that sets up the event something is gonna happen at 9 o'clock. I always go back to Jojo Rabbit because it's the one I broke down very specifically for our course. But, on one side of the clock, he sees a knife. On the other side of the clock, he gets stabbed, or he stabs someone with the knife. Like,
Yeah.
these types of things are connected, setups and payoffs. And what's neat is if you look at Dan Harmon's story circle, this is true as well.
Yeah, so like the need beat
Mhm.
is directly across from take.
Yes.
Leave is or go is directly across from return. Search
Mhm.
is directly across from change, right? And so let's just think about search and change for a minute. A character searching for the thing they want. Usually in traditional storytelling, they are searching because of their flaw, right? They're consumed by
Right.
the flaw. They're unchanged and pursuing the thing they want. But to return to the direct opposite of search in the let's just say what time is that? 2 o'clock,
Maybe
3 o'clock.
the search. The search,
Yes.
that would be like
3 o'clock.
5, yeah,
4.
4:30.
Oh yeah, sorry, 4:30 because
You can't read clocks.
find is 6. I don't know how to read clocks. So if find
It's
is
all
6 o'clock,
digital.
that's halfway through the clock. Oh my God, I'm totally lost. We can cut this later. But search and change are opposites, basically, right? Like, and
Yeah.
to be changed in your story, your character would never have made the choices that they were making at that part of the story that they would in the other. Like the fact that they're across from each other is an interesting thing. It forces you to think, okay, even after you've written your script,
Yeah.
put the page numbers on these beats and think about what scenes are connected. So you can use the story clock exercise and the story circle exercise to, on one hand, create a clear line of causality and make sure that you have characters making choices and changing. And then on the other, making sure that you have interconnectivity, rhyming in your story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, let's see, what's a film that you and I both know really well? Maybe Inception.
Yeah, sure.
Could we possibly talk about, all right, let's think about the story circle in terms of Inception. And then we can also think about, as we go, we can think about how this sets up stuff that's going to come up later.
I don't
So,
remember the movie that well, but I will say, so it's a character, Tyler Cobb. Sorry, is that not Tyler? It's his name's Cobb. Anyway, Leonardo DiCaprio. Cobb, he is in a zone of comfort. He's in his regular job, right? He's doing a con of some sort of corporate conglomerate. He's on a job. He's still dealing with the guilt of his wife's death, because the first time we meet him, he sees his wife. He's needs something. He needs his children. He needs to get back to his family, and he's trying everything he can to get back to them. And he gets the opportunity to get his children when what's his name? The guy offers him a job. Yeah, the businessman. Yeah, Saito. Saito offers him a opportunity that if you do this job, if you can plant Inception into Robert Fisher's head, you will get your family back. Right. So that's a very clear go. He's going to go and leave to get the thing he needs, which is his children. And as he's searching, he's very much clearly, this is the part of the story where he gets the group together. It's the classic heist trope of, we're getting the gang together. Are you in? Yeah, I'm in. Right. He gets his team. He assembles his team. And while doing so, it's clearer and clearer that his flaw of Ma, his ex-wife, is clearly in his subconscious. The guilt of what he did to her is consuming him. And so I would say, I don't know if the story circle really works with this, because he doesn't find what he needs there, right? Like, he doesn't find what he needs at the midpoint. The midpoint is very clearly the job starts and everything goes wrong.
mm-hmm. I mean, he finds, it's interesting. I guess, how does it work with find, take, return, and change? It's like, because it can't actually be that you find what you need halfway through movies. Yeah. That doesn't tend to happen. Like the midpoint tends to be.
I think this is more. I think this really works extremely well with TV,
mm-hmm.
where you have and also, to be clear, Dan Harmon has not really written movies. He mostly writes TV. So if you look at an episode of Community or Rick and Morty, the find is very much clearly at the midpoint.
I'd say
that's why I say I'm less interested in looking. Sorry, not just because the Inception example doesn't really work, but
no, I think.
Well, he doesn't find what he needs at the midpoint.
What he finds, though, isn't the midpoint part of the midpoint when Maul starts showing up and effing up his stuff.
That's
like,
true.
He keeps
no, that's true.
She
does become unleashed, right? So, but he's not looking for. He's looking for his children,
right? But at the midpoint, it's sort of like, because the emotional track of the film is not completely layered on top of the objective track, you have a little bit of disparity in this room, because it's like, what he's pursuing is his children, but in order to get to his children, he has to let go of his wife and his guilt and what he did to her. So there's going to be some moments, because those things don't directly line up, where the beat favors one or the other. It either favors the kid track or it favors the track with his Flaw and Maul. So I think what it is I think at the midpoint, he's sort of at the find point of Dan Harmon's story circle. He's really getting confronted with what he needs emotionally, which is interesting. Like he's learning that he needs to let go of this thing. That he needs to let go of what he did to his wife. And then from there, he's still trying to, instead of take, obviously Inception is to plant, right? He's not taking it necessarily. He, by planting something in his head, he's taking what he wants, which is being able to see his children again. So the act of planting it is the emotional take. And then when does he change in the film, Adam?
Once he's stuck in purgatory, or not in purgatory, in the in the what's it called? He's stuck in like the lowest level of consciousness.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that I think that this is why I like kind of breaking this stuff down with you, because I think if we look at Dan Harmon's stuff, all of these verbs are really about the emotional journey, not necessarily the physical journey. And so sometimes that really works, like in a traditional like hero's journey thing. Like you literally leave, you might literally take, like you might go take the sword, you might go take something. But I think that as it connects to movies overall, I think that these verbs are strictly emotional. And sometimes it's not necessarily connected to the action that's happening. Like it's not that every single film you have something that you physically take, right? Like that's just
Right.
that's not true. But every single film there is this emotional character transformation that's happening. And I think that that's what the circle is pointing to. It's less like specific.
I also the only I totally agree with that. The only resistance I have is kind of like the frame of holistically embracing this as like any type of objective truth, right? Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's just like I see this as a flexible tool, right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
right. Like when people get really hung up on like, oh my God, take didn't line up perfectly in this sort of breakdown. I think, well, yeah, stories. Well, The Lion King has like an hour long act one, you know, like, you know, there you can do things like there's flexibility in this. And I'm less interested in how the story circle maps out on a macro level over an entire 3-act structure, and more interested in how the story circle how you can use 7 story circles in a movie. Like for me, like creating new structures that are internally consistent and have nuance and yet still uphold the overall structure. Like that for me
What do
is
you
like
mean by having multiple circles in one movie?
I'm just saying, like for me, the interesting aspects of okay, how do I give every character a story circle? Even if it's like
Oh, okay.
only 5 pages of screen time, making sure that it all connects and that they have clear, like even if it's just a little bit of an act 1, a little bit of act 2, a little bit of act 3, like I've made these connections. They are all of a piece together. And like, I'm thinking about how they relate to each other. Like for me, that's the interesting space of this. I feel like it's less interesting when because I assume that if you're doing 3-act structure, you're doing some version of the hero's journey, and you're doing at least some version of these beats. I think what some people forget, and the benefit of the story circle from a macro point of view, is the pay a price.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of people have really weak all is lost moments, right? They have like, oh my God, I'm so sad. Now I'm not going to be selfish anymore, right? The great thing about the story circle is like, no, you got what you needed and paid a price for it. That makes it very tangible and concrete. But aside from that, like I don't know, the interesting space for me is how do you use this adaptively? How do you, let's just say you're writing a TV pilot. How do you have a full story circle in your cold open? Like that's the interesting space of this for me. Like, okay, how do I
So
have a
what would
character who
be
needs something? Yeah.
so in terms when you're using it like that, sort of like in like this micro story circle,
Yeah.
that's basically an abbreviated setup and payoff, right? Or like not abbreviated, that's like it's a setup and a payoff that has some
Yes.
sort of emotional catharsis or release at the end, right? I think I think for me, the thing that's kind of blowing my mind right now is that it's finally clicking for me that the story circle really connects to the character's transformation.
Yes.
And sometimes it might be physical, like it might manifest physically with the objective and obstacles and stuff like that.
Right.
But really it's fully about what the character is doing. And I think that this is sort of that's not initially what I thought, because I was still thinking in terms of hero's journey language, which he still uses with stuff like go and return and take and find. It's very questy,
Yeah.
right? Like you're a knight going on a quest, but I don't think it's actually speaking to that. I mean, maybe
I mean,
he
I think it
intended
can.
it
I
that
think it
way, but
can. I think it's
it
both ways, and that's what
can.
makes it interesting. That's what
Yeah.
makes it interesting. Like you can use
Yeah.
it. You can use it both ways, right? Like, I mean, for me, when I've used the story circle, I have a. I definitely think in terms of. I've only really used it for TV, um, to be honest. But I've always thought of go as um, Act One break.
Right.
Like, okay, we've left Act One. They're going after their objective, and I always think of take as the midpoint, right? Those, like I plant those flags, and I think in terms of I do think in terms of concrete goals, like, oh, what's the objective? They should have their objective by go, right? you know,
Well,
um,
yeah, they should. And
right?
I think that maybe that's kind of an interesting thing to think about is if we I mean, maybe this is just me wanting to go through the exercise. What if we kind of go through the story circle together and we think about how each of these things might connect to the flaw, like very quickly?
Yeah,
Um, and then maybe we can think about too, like how that overlaps with other plot things that are happening and why those sometimes sync up, like the go. But maybe first we go through and we kind of think about it as the flaw. So
yeah. Um,
starting with you.
So I think, is the character in their zone of comfort. So like I think this like this is truly like the character in their day-to-day everyday life, and they are embodying their flaw, right? We meet the character
Right.
and they live their life because of their flaw. And
Yep. It's
beat
like
number two, oh yeah, sorry, you go.
oh, so the comfort zone is the world that has made this ready to get super psychological. It's like the flaw is the coping mechanism that they have to deal with the world that they're in at the very beginning of the story. And over the course of the story, when they leave that world, it's going to become a maladaptive coping mechanism, right? It's not going to work anymore. It's whatever it was doing for them before because of this ordinary world, it's not going to accomplish that later. So, in this very beginning, we meet the protagonist in the world that has made their flaw, right? Like, it's their flaw is super useful when we meet them in the you. Maybe it's that it's help, like, maybe it's some version of being selfish, but being really focused on themselves and their career and all that has allowed them to become extremely wealthy and influential. Maybe we meet them when they're like a famous business person who's on top of the world. And so the flaw really works there. And it's going to cause problems for them later. And that leads us into the next beat, which is need. And that to me ties really directly to inner need, right? Which is generally the flip side of the flaw. It's the hole in the protagonist that needs to be filled for them to have a happy, fulfilling life. Um, Adam, do you have anything else to say about
Yeah,
the
and so need
inner
is their
need?
flaw. Need is like the thing they yearn for. It's an active thing. It's not. It's and I think a lot of people mess up like by making it kind of just passively part of their status quo um, zone of comfort. Like it has to be something aspirational. And what Pixar does really well is they make that aspiration somewhat like toxically tied to their flaw. Like it's a toxic love. Like Mr. Incredible loves being a superhero so much, and he wants to go out and do it again, but he is still kind of egotistical and narcissistic,
And they
right?
call
Like
it
the
their
way he
grand
loves,
passion, right?
right?
The
Yeah, or the
grand
way
passion.
exactly the way he loves the thing that he wants to go after is toxic, and the whole story is about how he renegotiates that basic love, that yearning. But go is where they go after the thing they want, the good thing that they've been yearning for. They leave their zone of comfort. Um,
And how
but
does that connect to the flaw?
right, so ideally, you have your character has a flaw, and it's not just like a negative characteristic. It's like the worldview and framework by which they make choices, right? So if you have a character who is has a, let's just talk about Mr. Incredible. He loves being a superhero. So, or I don't know. Look,
Yeah.
here's another Pixar example that's better. Finding Nemo. Marlin loves being a father so much, but he suffocates his son by doing it. Right?
Hmm.
He, let's just say he's gonna. I don't want to get into too specific an example, but the idea is, if you're going after something, you're making choices that are because of your flaw. So the way he goes, when he goes on the adventure, the types of things a character would make along the way would be because of their flawed worldview. That needs to change. So
So
yeah,
they're going. So go is sort of like a double-sided thing, because you're going into a new world because of your flaw.
yeah,
Typically, to connect it to the plot side of things, typically you have an objective that is tied to your flaw somehow. So you want it for a flawed reason, or your flaw is going to get very difficult. Typically, it's that you want it for a flawed reason.
yeah,
But that's not always true. But it's very tied to your flaw. And so you get launched into this new world. Um, and now we lead to
and when you say
search.
new world, you're talking about search, find, take, and return, right?
Yes, talking
Okay.
about Act 2, New World is an environment which is no longer your protagonist's comfort zone. And now their flaw is a problem. Now they're out of the place that made their flaw helpful, and it's become a maladaptive coping mechanism. That thing that used to help them a lot is now going to cause a lot of problems for them. And that's the new world of Act 2. It's everything. It's new rules. It's new, like, it could literally be like a new space, like a new physical space that they're in. But it's about like new culture, new social rules, new hierarchy, new power structures, new stuff that they're not used to, and their flaw is going to be put to the test constantly.
Yeah. So and okay, so they're searching, and they are like same as go. They're making choices based on their flaw while they search for the thing that they're going after, right? So a lot of people sort of define this as like they're pursuing and then there are obstacles on their adventure, right?
Right.
And they find the thing they're looking for. Um, and because they've been pursuing the thing they've been wanting because of their flaw, um, like hopefully, I think, and this is maybe a little too more advanced than what we're talking about right now. Hopefully, we're sort of taking stock of the choices they've made, so you can have consequences for those choices later, right? So, like, this is the part of the story where, like, you want to really be setting up potential. Okay, they're making choices because of their flaw through search and find. How am I going to have these consequences really play out these choices play out into consequences later on in the story? I think a lot of people forget that inevitable, like, consequences from choices of the protagonist are so satisfying. Like, bad things happening to a character are so much more. The audience gives so much more grace for that when it's because of choices they made before.
Hmm. Absolutely. I'm starting to look at this and I'm starting to think that probably, well, let's keep going. So that was take and find, right? Um, so we find the thing that they're looking for, and they have to pay a price to take it, and return. How does that connect to flaw?
Well, they take they take and they pay a price for the thing that they wanted the whole time. That price they pay is the thing that transforms them from their flaw to their inner need, right? So like it's the act of flipping. They get the thing they've always wanted, but they pay a price for it. The paying the price, the taking moment is like where their world shifts. I call it the all is lost moment, right? Like, I mean, I don't call it. People call it the all is lost moment. That's the moment they realize that their flaw, they can't go on living that way, or they don't want to, and that they need to change or want to change, right? So the fact that the price they pay is what transforms their flaw into their inner need.
Cool. So you know what? I'm looking at this and I'm wondering if maybe it's a little if the way that Dan Harmon's circle is typically represented might be a little bit off, because I think that tell
It's
me
great
if
for
you if
TV. It's great for
but if
TV.
you think about it like okay, for then maybe for a film, the go and the search and the find sections I think should be like are not equal parts, right? Like that's your act 2.
So what some people, so this is like the point I would agree with you, where like if you're just talking about a 3-act film and you're dividing act 2 into act 2A and act 2B, separated by the midpoint. Search find is act 2A.
Mhm.
Take return are act 2B. Yeah, I think if you have your all is lost moment, at the paying the price moment happens after the midpoint in this, where in the ideal 3-act structure, the paying the price would happen at the act 3 break, right? You want it to happen in like here would be return change, right? So like I think that's the difference.
Mhm.
But in
Absolutely.
TV, it works fantastic.
And by that, do you mean half hour and hour?
I think especially half hour, which is like, I mean, you see it play out if you watch an episode of Community.
Yeah.
You'll see 6, sometimes just 3, but never just one story or circle play out. Almost all the main characters, all the plot lines have cascading story circles, and they all play out on these beats. And it's actually kind of nice to have breathing room of the price happens at the midpoint or a little bit after.
Yeah, that's true. So it's sort of like because TV episodes are like especially in half hour things like Community, since they're missing an hour, like since you're an hour short, um it's deciding okay, what do you prioritize to still get that shape that you want? And so it's really moving up kind of closing act 2 more, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a shorter act 2 than you would see in a film. So typically in a film you have a lot more searching, finding before you hit the take and return. Whereas in TV it plays out much faster. Does that make any sense?
I think the structure in TV can a half hour especially
Mhm.
is a little, the midpoint almost can function as well, midpoint can function more like act 3 of a movie, not act 3, but like the transition from act 2 to act 3. But it depends. Like I also think that there's flexibility here, right? Like we all want these events to happen, we all need this change to happen, but when people get like really wrapped up in like, oh my god, we had 30 pages of we had exactly, we don't have the exact page count appropriated for search. Like I think people miss the point, right? Like you're telling a story, right? And yeah, you want to be hitting your commercial breaks, you want to be have a good structure, especially for your protagonist A plot or whatever. But the point of this is to see the line of causality, um, and to make sure that it's working for the story you're telling. I think if you know, yeah, if I was making a movie, I would probably delay the paying the price to the end of Act 2 into Act 3.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of explain what I mean a little bit more, um, so do you mean that TV shows have a story clock with less minutes for each of the beats? I think that my impression is that Dan Harmon's story circle really thrives in the exact even pie slice form for half-hour TV. And then I think that my impression is that when you start looking at a movie, you start seeing you actually see the pie the slices of pie changing size. Like, I think that the size of a couple slices is a little different. So,
But the one thing I will
for
add to that, one thing I'll add to that a little, Alexie, is that like that changes when you have 4 or 5 story circles happening at the same time, right? Like if you have in a episode of television, you have an A plot, B plot, and C plot that all take up different page counts. These are all on top of each other and staggered.
Right.
So like that changes like how you would necessarily appropriate like the screen time taken up by each beat.
Let's see. So I'm going to attempt to draw this, maybe Adam, while you keep going. But let me see what I can do. I'm going to work on this, Adam. Well, maybe why don't you talk a little bit about the
Are we in the Q&A section?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think so.
We don't have a good ending, but that's okay.
All right. Why don't we talk a little bit about, I mean, you could talk a little bit about the organic structure of story and like kind of like why circles work.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah, so sure. So and this is why I find both of these exercises to be beneficial and interesting. The reason I find these interesting is that they are flexible, right? And they can fit into multiple types of structures and needs, right? You can use a story circle to help you fix act 1 of your story. You can use a story circle to just find out who's this character and what is the best way into them. You know, you can just sort of go through the beats being like, okay, you need go, adapt, find, pay, return, change, and just sort of write down those things, and then maybe tell yourself the story. Okay, I'm going to tell myself the story in 30 seconds, record it. Okay, I have something. I've broken through ground. I've used this tool. I don't think the story circle is great as just like, this is the A plot and that's all there is, you know. Like I think it's used best in conjunction with other frameworks that you're comfortable with, because at the end of the day, it's all theory until you start writing and you have material and you've got like, oh my God, I wrote this scene that's really funny, but like, does it relate to the story? You know, you want to this is a great way to make sure that the things you are writing and the ideas you're having are connected to story and story moments that matter, right? Like if you wrote a scene based on the protagonist searching for the thing that they want, it's related to the plot. It's connected. It's connected to what will come after as well. This is about having a clear line of causality. And if you have, let's just say you're writing a half-hour sitcom and you've got your A plot, B plot, and C plot, and each one of them has a story circle. You can write out all those beats and sort of think, how do they connect to each other? What is this scene going to be? But once it's all scenes on the page, once you've actually written it, you'll see once you've actually written it, the use of a story circle is going to be a little different. It's going to be more of an editorial tool to be like, did I actually do that? You know, I think a lot of beginning writers get really overconfident once they first learn the tools of story. I know I was, you know, once I read Robert McKee, I was like, oh my God, I get this. I'm a genius. You know, I had written one screenplay and I was like, I understand how it all works. This is all fantastic. But then like inspiration happens, right? You create raw material. You come up with the perfect structure, but the story's hollow, right? There are all these different problems that different writers with different strengths and weaknesses come up with. The trick is finding out what works for you and making it making it work, right? And at the end of the day, like everybody says, writing is rewriting. Great writing is rewriting. So you can use the story circle to rewrite. I really believe in using it multiple times. Do it 5 times to get it right. You know, like think about it very clearly. And it's okay if things change. At the end of the day, you're less likely to do something stupid if you do it 3 times in a row, right? Like Alexie, I'm gonna quote you on that. But it's really just, I think this tool is great because it's simple and it's easy to remember. and you don't get bogged down in the details necessarily. But what matters is that you're writing stuff that you feel is connected to your characters and that you're telling a good story. Don't overthink it. I know this conversation is all about like interconnectivity and plot, construction, but at the end of the day, you're telling a story. All of these tools are just ways to make the connections deeper and to like look at your story from a different angle. Like, I think this is a great way to see the story, but another great way to see a story is just to imagine the movie playing out. What's the audience experience of this? Right? I think so often I forget. I'm so wrapped up in my, oh my God, my all is lost beat. The character does this and this relates to this other moment. But then I completely forget, what information does an audience really have at this moment to make that connection, right? That's a totally different lens to look at it. And like, so when you're writing a story, you got to look at it from 14 different angles to make it really work. And this is just one way to make it work.
So I wanted to take a look at the story circle again. So this is how Dan Harmon has it out. And this is what I was talking about with saying like equal slices of pie, right? Like everything is equal here. And I think that maybe this works for the half-hour shows, but I think that in general, it takes a different shape when you're looking at features, because I think that these two sections here, this section between go and search, I think that these get much bigger. So I think that what happens is we are going to,
although it
change
depends,
doesn't
though.
happen till the
It depends though, right?
the
Like
end.
if we define just before you start doing that, if we define your midpoint as a change in tactics for the objective, right? The game totally changes. They could be searching and finding in the first part of the story, right? And the first part of Act 2. And then the midpoint changes everything, and the way they go about going up their objective is different. And that could maybe go under find and take, right?
It could. But if it's like specifically about, if we are looking at it as more of a what is it? The story. What's the traditional one? The night one?
What?
The traditional 3-act structure with hero's journey. If we're looking at this like very
soul.
like that kind of thing. If we're like looking at like hero's journey type stuff, like where this is more physical, like you're actually going into a new world, and then like when do you actually find the objective that you were looking for and stuff like that, everything starts getting kind of moved up, so you don't change until the very end typically. Oops, let's move this here. So basically what typically happens is your second act lasts for most of the movie. You have a midpoint change at halfway, right? At halfway through your act 2, which is about 65 minutes, 65 pages in. But you don't actually confront your objective until you hit the ultimate test, which happens around page, like, if you were following that, it might happen around page 100 or like 90. So you end up moving stuff and it becomes much more like that. And then this would be about the middle of these
and
two.
just to clarify, you're just talking about the macro story arc of the protagonist.
Yeah. Yep. So everything gets moved.
And also, I think what we're trying to talk about is like maybe the platonic ideal of the average Hollywood film.
Yep.
I mean,
there.
We can quibble about this a lot. There's a lot of I think there's a lot of variety and there's a lot of potential, right? We talk about like what has worked, what is like the standard. Like if you look at the average Pixar film, it does very specific things as a machine manufactured to create a very particular type of emotional experience, right? And they've really honed it in to be something. But a novel, or like let's just say a long-standing arc of an anime with 300 episodes can have the same kind of overall narrative beats. but over 300 episodes, and we could spend 200 episodes of that in search, right? Like
Right.
there's like, if you can cut the pie however you want, at the end of the day, but it depends on the commercial expectations of the medium.
And yeah, let's go ahead and can I clear this whole thing? Ah, wow. Okay. So let's just scroll over and do it again. We got a question about, can you map out pages? Yes.
Yeah,
So let's
but
take a
again,
look.
just like the overall ideal, right? Like I truly think it's yes, 90% of the time, and it's important, the first scripts you write should be within like the average expectation of what a spec screenplay is in the industry, because you want to have a career and you want producers to like what you're reading. So like but Paul Thomas Anderson doesn't think about any of this stuff, right? He's thinking about telling a good story.
Yeah. Let's do this.
Even
So like
like
it really
structure guys. Sorry, what were you saying?
let's take a look. So if you were wondering like what the page count looks like, it kind of depends on how long you want your movie to be. But like let's say you're going for 100-page script, 100-minute movie.
Are we
So like
talking
about
about the average spec script now?
I get we're just talking about page counts
Yeah,
for
I mean, I
scripts
know
in
page
general.
counts for the average, like, because like the only reason I bring that up is that there's been a movement, for example, to have the inciting incident happen in the first 5 pages.
Right. I'm not gonna that's not what I'm doing. I'm mapping out
Gotcha.
just like showing kind of like what it looks like and how you can think of it. So just like very literally.
Totally.
So there we go. So that's about like, so if I was going to make my story clock when I make it, this is kind of what I draw. The 1 o'clock or the 12 o'clock is for page one / the very last page of your movie, right? And then I typically will map out how many fourths I'm going to do depending on, or like I map out what my fourths are, kind of depending on how long I think the movie is going to be. Sometimes I get really annoying and aim for like 110 pages, which means you have really like it's like broken down into sections of 27, which is kind of annoying, but this is like loosely how you can do it. So you would be mapping it out on the face like this. And so then you might know, like, say you were going to have your inciting incident or break into act 2 at like page 20, you'd probably put that over here, which tends to line up about with your midpoint over here, because that's the full, or not, yeah, not midpoint. Midpoint is a little lower, but that kind of a thing. Like you can map things out like that and kind of does that was that the question about the
Yeah,
pages?
I think so.
Yeah, so it's pages and minutes. Minutes are the same as pages. Has anyone made sense of using the story clock for super short pieces like commercials? I'm so lost there. I would kind of, it's like as you strip it away, basically what it becomes always is thinking about your setup and your payoff. So if you were going to be using this for something super short, like a 30-second spot,
I think
you
those are
start.
almost 2-act.
Yeah, exactly. It's setup and payoff, right?
That's
Which is
all there is.
exactly what this is. This is basically both of these things, the clock and the circle, are basically more elaborate versions of setup and payoff that kind of snowball and build on each other, right? And so if you were going to be doing a commercial, it's like the shorter it gets, the less of that snowballing you need. It's just setup, payoff.
Although I think you can, and also I think a lot of commercials aren't complete stories, right?
That's what yeah, exactly.
Like they are literally that, but there are short, you can tell a complete story in that short amount of time. Just commercials aren't typically doing that. Like I've seen some episodes of Rick and Morty will have a full story play out in 15 seconds as kind of like a side bit, right? And you could say technically the beats of the story circle played out in those 15 seconds. It's super rudimentary, and it's almost like, or just they'll have like a tiny plot line in the background with like I'm thinking of the season 5 opener. What was the name of that episode? It was like that place where Morty has that door into. Oh, you haven't watched it, but Morty has like this door into like this Narnia like place, and every time he walks in, time passes super fast. Super fast there, but very slowly in his world. And he's just trying to get some wine for Rick for a party. And Rick left it there so it could ferment because of the way time passes there. So Morty gets his wine, but he unintentionally causes this family's father to die. And the kid just lies there being, no. Anyway, they go back. But like, we only get about 5 minutes of screen time, or maybe 8 minutes of screen time for that other world. But every time Morty comes back, they've developed some sort of culture and story about, oh my God, this evil boy who's like this, he's killed so many people and he's like this demon. Every next time we see him, in fact, this whole civilization's built their whole technology to kill Morty, even though he accidentally killed somebody. I'm paraphrasing tremendously, but you can see the story circle plays out from those people's point of view. Like, except their objective is to kill this boy, and they mythologize him. Even though it's only a very short amount of screen time. It's the season opener of season 5.
And we haven't actually really discussed commercials in the past. That is something we could do. It's
Some
sort of
commercials are like a singular event. Like I've seen this commercials used to have stories. And now I'll see Rashida Jones just carrying a credit card and be like, "Whoa, hi, I'm going to buy this credit card."
Yeah, it's like, is it like a micro short film, or is it like an actual, or like, is it just like a ad, right? And I guess
they can be both.
And and so we could talk about more. We could look at like shorts and then like keep looking at like what changes as it gets shorter and shorter and shorter until you end up in like commercial 15-second spots.
5 seconds is the one I see. Like the Liberty Mutual. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
I have not seen those cow Furby creepy doll commercials with Comic Sans. I have not.
But we should definitely think about doing a super short form copy class sometime in the future. But
Mike, super short show.
So we're doing the menu next week.
Wow. Yeah, we are. It's going to be fun. We're going to be breaking down the menu, which has, what's her name in it? Who's fantastic?
Anya Taylor-Joy, Ralph Fiennes, Nicholas Hoult.
Yep. Let's do it. Awesome. All right, everybody. We will see you next week. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.